And part of that is I want to introduce a lot more reference points to the story. I just kind of want to expand. I want to create more involving worlds or involving stories, but not explicit stories. I think it's important to me because, again, I don't know what they are when I paint them. It's not like, I've got this story I want to get on a piece of paper. It's something that comes to life as I work on it, and I like when people are able to find those kind of, even if they're totally personal stories or to them within the work itself, or interpret it in a way that is unique to them.
Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of the Lo-Fi Sight and Sound podcast. I am John Wentz. Welcome from Paris, France. Off the bat, I'd like to say thank you to all the new subscribers, followers. There's a big jump in growth since the last episode. Really excited to see that, so thank you very much. Welcome. If you can, please take a chance to rate and review on whatever chosen platform you have. These little gestures make a huge difference. I have some really exciting projects lined up, but things like good reviews, stars, likes, thumbs, all that good stuff makes these much easier for me to achieve. So with that out of the way, this episode I have my friend and amazing artist Craw, also known as Shaun Friend, on the podcast. He was kind enough to chime in from just outside Sheffield. I've known Shaun for years, but only online. We actually just met for the first time. I think it was back in December. Him and his lovely partner made a trip out here to Paris, and they stopped by my studio, and then we went and had a beer and had a great talk. From his website, artist and habitual doodler Craw lives and works just outside of Sheffield on the edge of the Peak District. His work plays with the beauty to be found in contradictions and ambiguity, life and death, beauty and decay, strength, fragility, the interplay between conflicting and complementing forces of nature. It's an ongoing exploration of a natural world where his muses are surrounded by flowing lines and natural forms, and where he works to uncover their ambiguous connections and hidden narratives. Each piece is a story or an aspect of an unfolding story that writes itself as he works on it. What has happened? Who are these people? What is their story? He aims to create work that, in open to interpretation, asks questions and invites involvement rather than providing answers. And without further delay, Craw. I generally don't do like some cheesy intro, so I kind of just start. But
No, do cheesy intro. I want to hear it.
What's that?
Do a cheesy intro. For authenticity.
No, I do those in post. I do in the post-production. So, so thanks. So here I'm sitting in conversation with Shaun Friend, otherwise known as Craw. And maybe I should have asked, can I use your real name?
Yeah, sure, you can. Feel free, Shaun.
Okay, because I noticed you have on social media, so.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I started off as Craw, and kind of 10 years later, I kind of feel like maybe I should move to Shaun Friend, but it's a bit late to that now, so I'm quite happy to use both. How
did you start out with that, with the Craw?
Well, I'd like to have a really cool story, but I was working at the time. I mean, I got into this, when I first started putting my work out there, well, probably 10, 12 years ago, I was working in advertising, design, and it was kind of a dual existence, and I wanted to keep the two very separate. I didn't want what I was doing as art to be connected in any way with the day job, as it were. So it's just a way of differentiating the two.
And so then you just stuck with it once you left the graphic design? Yeah,
well, things started to happen, and people were responding to the name Craw. So then it was like, well, that's my name now, apparently, so I'll stick with that. And it works well. I mean, it's good people remember it. And it kind of fits with the work as well, yeah. The crows and whatnot. So, yeah, it's worked for me.
Yeah. And so that was interesting because I didn't know any of your background. So, and recently you were here in Paris, and that's when we finally got to meet in person, have a drink. And I found your background really interesting, from graphic design transitioning to art. Can you recap that? Like, how long were you working as a graphic designer, and what got you into traditional art?
Well, right. So I was working in graphic. I mean, I always worked in graphic design from when I left school. Didn't really go to university, so for about 25 years I was working in graphic design, in advertising, and I loved it. I went through a very traditional route through it in advertising. I started off as an office junior, really old school agencies, through designer to be an art director, creative director in the last few years, in various agencies, and I did enjoy it. I loved it. I loved, the creativity of it. I loved working with creative people, the ideas, working with illustrators, photographers, because as an art director, the ideas guy, you're pulling it all together rather than necessarily generating the creativity yourself, or the elements you pull together, photographic work, illustrated work, and I love working with those people, and designing. But much as I loved it, there's always this nagging argument. There's a consistent argument that goes on in the background of, at the end of the day, you're trying to be creative and it's a commercial environment. And I think some people react very well with that, but I found it a constant battle. So there were, 20 years of the same old arguments with, I'd be trying to do one thing for one reason, hopefully drawing on some level of expertise and a creative eye, and then you're having an argument with a businessman about the colour of this, that, or the other, which he's got a point of view, but he's perhaps not informed enough to affect the work in the way he does. So I don't know. It was always a bit of a battle to me, and it started to do my head in. I really struggled with it in the later years. And I got quite bitter, and I think Penny picked up on that because I'd come home in quite bad moods. And she said, well, after arguing all day and swearing and whatnot. But yeah, she said, well, go back to what you used to do, what got you into it in the first place. And that was just drawing and create some art. Because I hadn't done that. I mean, working in advertising, surprisingly, you do rough ideas and whatever, put marks down, but you very rarely actually create any finished artwork yourself. So I went back to that, and I just started putting marks down, kicking ideas around. And at that point, you realise that you actually have to have an idea. It's hard to develop a style again from the scratch, because I suppose at the time I was 40. I'm a very old guy. And so, the first few years I was just, doing lots of stuff, trying out lots of different things. A bit of digital. A lot of the time I'd be sneaking around at work, doing it at work, which is quite entertaining. But so that's how I got back into it to start off with. When I should have been working, I was busy in Photoshop putting together illustrations for myself, for Craw.
And those were illustrations, like you were doing pencil doodles and then putting those, or were you working completely digitally in Photoshop?
Well, the way I was working there, I mean, the consistent sort of theme throughout everything I've done is, but I don't actually know what I'm doing. So I was working on computers all day, every day. So I was just drawing, doing sketches, scanning them in, then colouring them in Photoshop. So I don't know. I've never actually painted digitally. Like I know you've got into that recently, John. The way I was doing it was layering it up, and then layering marks and brush strokes and marks, and then working into it all, erasing it and blending it. And that's how I was working digitally. I didn't know any better. Maybe that's a way of doing it, but it's what worked for me. And it was good digitally because you can change it, and there's Command Z. It's great. Just go backwards.
Quick erase.
Yeah. Delete the layer. So that's what was working for me, and it helped me, find a way back into it, really.
And what I find it's interesting is looking back at, as I was taking a look at your work again, and from, was it like 2010 I think you have it completely cataloged on your website, like that 8 years from 2010 to 2018. And there's, I know, what you said, like quote unquote progressions, but your style and imagery almost has been consistent pretty much throughout the whole time, which I think is great. It's an amazing thing. Cause so I know I'm guilty of it. Like I've changed things throughout the years cause I'm unsure of things. How did you fall upon that? Like a lot of the work, early work, and even into now is, elongated forms, these really angular type of cuts on the figure, and then just female figures with animals, things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when in my sort of darker moments, one of the things I'm least happy with is I wonder if I'm just doing the same thing over and over again, which maybe I am, but at the same time I'd like to think it's moving forward and developing. It's very it's the way I work. I mean, I don't, some artists have a big idea, have a very clear idea of what they want to achieve, and it comes through in artist statements and whatnot, but my work's kind of grown very organically, so it develops from one piece to another, I'd say, rather than go through any. There's very few eureka moments in my career. I think at the beginning, finding a groove of, that kind of almost folklorish feel to it. I mean, living in the country like I do, right. I feel very connected to a kind of a folklore, a natural world feel. And it's all been a development of that, I would think, rather than any one big idea where it's like, aha, I must do this, that, and the other. In fact, when I do have those ideas, I'm making a note of it. And then, like 6 months down the line, I find that note again and thought, what happened to that big idea that I had? Absolutely nothing. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you think it's good when people work in that way, when, they go with an idea and it develops over time? Is that...
I don't know how to answer any question anymore about art. I personally, I do. And when I said that, like, I wouldn't say it's in the vein of like you're, doing the same thing over and over again. I know that worry, like you were saying. For me, like looking at your work, there's almost like for me, like a certain envy that you had something in the beginning and it is developing a lot through time. And then especially in the last 2 years. So it's not a common, that sounds almost negative. There's a look, like even from 2011, I look at work, I'm like, oh, that's Craw. And then now that's Craw, but it's different and better. And so for me, like I've never had that. And I part of it, I feel like is, cause you said yourself, like you didn't go to school for art, or at least for drawing and painting, right?
No. I didn't.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I feel like that you find that more with the quote unquote self-taught artists, is that they develop that look or style or theme or something earlier, and then they build upon it, which I feel like is a better way to do it.
I think it's kind of that lack of an official education in art. It's like a double-edged sword, I think, because the pluses are, on the one hand, you kind of almost work in... Well, I speak for myself. You work in ignorance. You've not been taught how to do things, and so that process of actually finding your way through it, the trial and error, leads you to something that is more uniquely your own, because there's a lot less direct influence on it, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The flip side is, like when I started painting in oils, which was really something I only touched on started 4 or 5 years ago. It was a nightmare. What the fuck? Yeah. But yeah, it's all in the doing it. And again, like I paint exclusively in oils now. I don't really touch on acrylics. And occasionally you get asked to do a tutorial, and it's very much like, well, I don't know. It's like, I can't teach you how to do it. I don't know myself. I've just found a way that works for me. and that's what comes through in the art is my way. The whole elongated forms, and looking back at stuff 10 years ago, it was way more exaggerated than it is now. I mean, I think it's still there.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it's still there. But the hands, the expressiveness of the hands, they were massive, and that was just purely because I couldn't draw hands. So I just found a way of drawing them that worked for me. So, I was happy with those hands, and I'm happy with the figures now. Sometimes I look at them and they're so wrong, like anatomically. If I work with a model, they're so wrong. I accept that, but at the same time, they feel right to me. So that's the thing that I'm constantly trying to do. If it feels right to me, then I'm not so concerned with if it's right or wrong. It's ticked my box. I'm happy with it, and hopefully someone else is as well. So I think that kind of ignorance, if you like, helps create something that's more unique.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Because I find, coming from my experience, like a quote unquote trained artist, you spend so much time afterwards, after your education, trying to forget things or unlearn things. And I think it was something I read recently that was interesting, that was saying, questioning this whole idea of, can you teach art? And kind of they were making a point that the only way you can teach art is there's no other way other than putting it into a system, right? Because you can really only teach systems, 1, 2, 3, A, B, C. So there's a good thing in, like, you can teach some mechanics of like how to mix paints and this and that, but outside of that, that's how you get into a dogmatic or maybe like a rigid style or view on art.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense, yeah.
Like you mentioned yourself, like, yeah, when it's somebody asks you to do a demo, it's a little bit of a trick, right? You're like, well, I'm kind of just figuring this out.
Yeah, but then I think, ask me 20 years from now and I'll still be figuring it out. I still won't know what I'm doing, but,
Right. Well, that's my point. It's because you have your way of doing it, your personal system, which maybe contributes to your, personal style.
I'm happy with that. But then, you do have your doubts. You have your doubts, you have your moments. What the fuck am I doing?
Well, and you're particularly isolated, like geographically too, right? Because you're in Sheffield.
Sheffield's not isolated. Sheffield's, I am. Well, I'm isolated from most of the people that seem to do what I do, because they all seem to be in America, apart from you in Paris. I live just outside Sheffield in the Peak District, quite a remote area.
Okay.
It's actually in an old sort of 18th century hunting lodge. It's a National Trust building. We've got an apartment here. So, I paint my studios in what used to be the gun room here. Day to day, I rarely see anyone unless I make the effort to go out, which quite often I don't. So I just sit there painting. But the internet's good for things like that, isn't it? Keeping in touch with people and chats and whatnot.
Yeah, I find it, it helps a bit, but there's definitely nothing like the real thing. I think you can delude yourself a little bit into that youth. Because I found, I'm far more social now.
So, the last artist I spoke to was in Paris in December, and that was you.
Oh, are you serious? Really?
Yeah. The last artist I spoke to. I've spoken to people since then, but no one else.
Do you think that there's a benefit to that? Because I don't know how you are. I find myself like so I have an up and down in being in Paris, and there's of course I think the ups are pretty self-evident, but I find like being back in a city that's centered around art, it's kind of hard for me to gain my focus back. Like when I go to the studio, I'm so visually stimulated, but all these things, you see all this art, all this graffiti, it takes me a bit to kind of settle into who I am. You know what I mean?
Obviously, it's different for different people, isn't it? I mean, what works for me or works for you is completely different. I mean, I can see where you're coming from. I mean, I like the remoteness of where I'm at. I find a lot of inspiration just in my surroundings. The studio is pretty much surrounded by woods. Funnily enough, I draw and paint a lot of woods and a lot of trees, and so it's great just being out in that. for stimulate, I like to be able to work there, but then go to places for stimulation. You know, the trip to when we met in December, Paris, that was one of those trips like I really need to go out and see some things and talk to some people. And so we went to Paris, or we've been down to London as well. So I like having those options. I mean, I wouldn't like to be in a busy city day to day. I like the remoteness, but I also like to be able to get out and actually see things and go to museums and do really cheesy things like that, really.
Going to a museum is cheesy?
Well, it's not, is it? It's what old people do. No, I mean, I love that.
That's right. Yeah, the young people go on Instagram.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, we were in the Louvre and we're always in museums. We're in New York last year and at the Met, and I love it. I love being in there. And then you think, God, ask me 25 years ago, and I'd have been mortified. But no, there's so much inspiration there.
Yeah, if little Shaun or young Shaun could talk to older Shaun.
I truly have turned into the old man Shaun. In fact, I find that quite interesting, like, and also quite inspiring. You know, one of the few things on Instagram that's inspiring is the amount. There's a lot of people there that you wouldn't imagine. Like, I'm dealing with stereotypes here, but you know, you follow tattooists. Pretty, you know, rough-looking guys. Imagine to be quite hard, but they love their art, and they're checking out museums and things. And it's always kind of, I find, reassuring that other people get something from museums and things like that as well. It's surprising. Is it surprising? And what am I saying, John? What am I saying?
You know, what's funny is this will be a tangential thing, but I had an experience when I first moved here to Paris like that. And one of the first bars I went to was, they have these rock and roll bars here, which are just like the dive bars. And I walk in and there's these guys with tattoos, leather jackets. Like, it was kind of intimidating. But then they walk in and then they give la bise to each other, you know, kissing on the cheek. And then, you know, you think they're going to be ordering shots of Jack, and then they order like a glass of like a nice Burgundy, and it completely shattered like the stereotype and kind of just puts you in check about it.
I think that's what I was getting at. I mean, I love it when people aren't exactly what you expect them to be. There's a lot. It's probably true of most people, isn't it? No one's.
Yeah, but I think you make a really good point about Instagram, though, because this whole idea of like branding and all these words I really don't like curating, you know, people curate their life and curate their feed. I find it's exacerbated now. It kind of promotes the stereotype.
Oh, yeah, it does, doesn't it?
You know, so like you're saying, like a tattoo artist, you'll see these other things, and then maybe in the stories you'll see a museum or something like, oh, I would have never figured.
Yeah, it's a nice little surprise, isn't it? I mean, Instagram's like that, isn't it? Especially the way it is now. I mean, it's changed a lot over the last 2 or 3 years. I mean, we talked about this when we met last month or a couple of months ago. It's a completely different beast to what it was. I've been on there for quite a long time. I think I started about 2013, 2012. And at that point, it really was, you know, following people, and you'd see their stuff, and then you'd follow other people and see more stuff, and it was great. It's a really good inspiration. I think that's when I first started following you back in those days. But now it's just a completely different beast, isn't it? I mean,
how do you feel about it now and the change? I mean, first, what do you see the change as? Because I think everybody's experience is a little different now. Because you're right. I remember following you really early on, like 2013, 2014.
Yeah, I think when it started, it really was a social platform. It was a great way of meeting people, of discovering people, discovering work. And it's quite exciting doing that. I mean, and as well, you know, I can't complain. I've sold work because it's been seen on Instagram. I've met people. So it worked really well for me. But I think, where is it? Last couple of years since Facebook took over. I mean, I don't want to be that obvious Facebook is evil guy, but it has become a business tool, and it doesn't work like it used to. I mean, to get it to work for you, you have to be on it all day, every day, putting the right keywords in, posting at the right time. So I know the fun has gone out of it. I think you still can use it as a business tool if you've got the time and the inclination to. But I don't know, that's a question you have to ask yourself.
Yeah. So how do you use it? Do you approach it from a business sense, or is it still a social thing?
I went through a stage thinking if I do it, I need to do it properly and put the right tags on. But it's just such a slippery eel as well. It's like 1 minute you're gaining followers, and then you're losing them. And it's just got to stage. I just think, I'm insecure enough. I can't be worrying about this. I can't be spending time chasing something that's perhaps not really core to what I do. So now I just put work on it, and if you like it, like it, and if you don't, and if you unfollow, well, you weren't going to buy any work anyway, were you? So it really doesn't matter. That's kind of the way I'm using it at the moment. Trying not to worry about it. I mean, maybe we should employ an intern to sit there, a social media manager to sit there all day and posting witty comments.
A lot of people have those. Yeah,
we'll go for it. In fact, a friend of mine, he's a photographer, really good photographer, and he started. He was like, Instagram, wasting money. And then a couple of months ago, I started seeing these posts from him. I'm like, that's not him talking. And I was like, David, have you been on some kind of social media course? And he said, no, big mistake. He started paying someone to do it for him. And these posts were just dreadful, really nice. cringe-inducing posts. And it lost the personal voice. And so, I think he's going to be putting a stop to that one.
Yeah, and it could really leave a mark on you doing something like that, man.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's really good, and he's a successful photographer, so he didn't need to do it. I think it was just an experiment, but I did point out to him that it read really bad. Mate, what are you doing? I mean, I spend, sometimes I'll spend half an hour trying to think of something to say, and in the end I'll just put, I don't know, an emoji instead, because I can't think of anything. Here, have a picture and an emoji.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty much the same. I have no quip or, life-altering quote to give. I
know, that's it. Everyone else seems to have so much more insight than I do.
Yeah. Does that worry you? Do you think about things like that?
Sometimes, yeah. But then it's not going to change, is it? So, no.
Yeah. I only ask because you mentioned, and I thought it was really cool to mention feeling insecure. And I think a lot of people, it's one of those funny things, and no one wants to admit their insecurities, but artists especially, it's like, one-on-one with a beer, everybody freely admits it. And you can't help but acknowledge that, the social media platforms, they heighten insecurities, times 1,000. I mean, it's what they feed on.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think again, talking for myself and artists I've spoken to, you spend so much of your time alone with your own thoughts on a day-to-day basis. I'm not sure, how many other jobs you do that. You're on your own. You're thinking about yourself and your work, and constantly judging it and constantly evaluating it. And trying to gauge its value in the world, and what is the point? Why am I doing this? They're kind of it's not a very healthy thing to be thinking about, and inevitably you go to some very dark places. And other times you're absolutely fine, but a quick visit to Instagram is a good way to make it seem a lot worse than it actually is, because everyone else is having so much more fun and doing so much better work and being so much more successful than you are.
Yeah, and got the better shows, or just got this residency, or
yeah.
But does that have an effect? Because when I wonder about artists, like looking at your work, like around, I would say, I don't know, it's probably earlier, so sorry if I'm wrong, but around 2018, I remember seeing a lot of you doing these really detailed and complex pencil drawings. I think they were graphite, like multi-figure and stuff like that, which to me, like I can't do that stuff. I've never been able to. And when I see that, it to me, it's like really strikes the imagination. So like, I wonder, like for you, like creating those, is that, because for me, like a thing like Instagram and social media has been something that kind of stifles my imagination at times. Like I really have to make efforts to get out of it and kind of get back into that, world enough to remember pre-internet. And I felt like my imagination was so much more active then. So, and when you're younger too, but so what I'm asked is like, do you find difficulty in getting into that complexity of work, that kind of really imaginative work now?
No, I mean, I think, well, in general, yes, it is hard because, again, you're constantly questioning what you're doing. But that's kind of what led to me doing those graphite pieces. As well as the insecurities over what you're doing and finding techniques. Painting for me is always a bit of a battle. I always, especially around 2 or 3 years ago when I was working my way into oils, it was a real wrestling match a lot of the times to get something that I was happy with. Whereas drawing, I feel totally at ease with that. Now, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because you're better off being challenged. But it's a medium I'm really comfortable with, and those pieces, I know what you're referring to. I mean, and I still do them. They, again, going back to the way I work, it's kind of a stream of consciousness way of working. Like I don't have a clear idea when I set out, and especially with those. So I'd start with the face and then just let the rest happen. So they weren't done with any particular objective in mind. It was just, let's see where the drawing takes me. So because I wasn't fighting with the medium, it allowed me just to, relax into them. And they were kind of really escapist to work on, apart from they gave me some really big headaches. Like working in that detail close up, and your eyes were going all over the place. But just they took on a life of their own, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed working on it. It's something I want to bring through into the painting now. Now I'm getting more comfortable with oils. It's something I'm trying to bring into the painting now. A bit more, a level of detail, a bit more elements. What's always key to me in the work that I do is trying to kind of create some kind of narrative or some engagement for people to get into, that there's a story in there. And I like working, even though I might not know what that story is at the time. So those pencil pieces worked really well for me at that point in time, just allowing myself to discover little stories and work my way through into the details, the ferns, the leaves, the little animals. They were great fun to work on. I enjoyed those.
Nice. Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't know that they were kind of a stream of consciousness thing, because all of them, they're very, just from like a standpoint of composition, all very different, but all very good. So do you think, are you relying on like subconsciously, like your background maybe in design or something like that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that's the one thing that has stuck with me is, so from working in design is that sense of balance and structure. I know when something feels right on a page, or at least when it feels right to me. Yeah, a composition. I'm happy working with placement. Much to, although it can be a bit problematic with the paintings when I realise everything's in the wrong place and I have to start again.
Yeah. So do you do more planning out with the paintings?
Sorry?
I was asking if you do more planning out with the paintings then, less stream of consciousness?
Well, yes. The idea is a stream of consciousness, but in a sketchbook, I mean, I think if you look at recent work I've done that I've posted on Instagram, there'll be really rough sketches, but then in transferring it, once I'm happy with how it's working, transferring it to the canvas. I mean, I have always just gone straight in with the brush, but they're getting too complicated now to do that. So I've started, gridding the page just so that I know things will be in the right place when I've done the underpainting. Because one thing I always used to find was I work a lot in the sketchbook. I put down a lot of ideas in the sketchbook, and I get something that's working really nicely in the sketchbook, and you think, right, great, that's one, I want to paint that. And you paint it and refer to the sketchbook, and you're trying to recreate what's on a sketchbook page, or I found it was, and it's never the same. Trying to paint something that you sketched and trying to copy the thing over, and I could never get it to work for me. So then I kind of I go swings and roundabouts. I go from one extreme to the other. So then it was, well, I've had the idea in the sketchbook. I'm going to close my sketchbook now, and I'm just going to make it up again on a canvas. So I just paint without maybe glancing at my sketchbook, but not worry too much about recreating it. So then for a period of time, I was very much like, I'm not going to draw these up. I'm just going to paint on the canvas. But then I've gone back now, and I think it's good. I think you learn something from doing something in a particular way. It doesn't hurt to backtrack again and revisit that idea of detail, which is what I'm doing at the moment. Now things are becoming more complicated. I think I need to perhaps tie things down. And so now, if you look on my Instagram, I'm drawing things up a lot tighter than I would have done previously.
Yeah, they almost look, they could be considered finished works, the ones that I've seen you post.
Thank you. Yeah, people seem to like the drawings, then I paint them and they go off them.
What do you think that, because I found that too. I don't do as much sketching as I used to. In a sketchbook, I'm mostly using digital now for that. But I always encounter that too, that thing about where the sketch, there was something about it that often wouldn't translate into the painting. And what was that for you? Do you ever figure that out? Is it a certain energy? Is it a certain... Because I always thought, this is probably different for everybody. My solution was more cerebral, I think, than that. What was it for you?
Yeah, I think sketchbook work has got a lot more energy for me, a lot of energy and a lot more spontaneity, and that's what works for me. And that's what I was losing going to canvas. Because I was trying to copy what was in the sketchbook, the process became technical rather than spontaneous. Do you know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah.
And I think that's what I was losing. So I got the spontaneity back, but it's a balancing act. Like I say, now I find I need to be a bit more tighter. But then once I think once I've got it drawn up on the canvas, and I know that's where things need to go, that's where that element needs to go, that's how that needs to relate to that, and I've got an underpainting on it, then you can afford to mess around with it again. Because worst comes to worst, you wipe it off and you've still got your underpainting. So you can still bring that element of spontaneity to it. Once you've got the skeleton down, if you like, then I'll paint over it. That doesn't work. Wipe it off, paint over it again, move things around, smudge it around. That's why I love oils. Just that flexibility. So I aim for spontaneity. I try and keep an energy to the piece. Sometimes it doesn't quite work that way, but that's what I like. That's what I hope to capture.
Yeah. So do you seal the drawing once you put it on the canvas? Put type of acrylic medium over it or something?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, and then the way I've been doing it is then doing underpainting over the top, just with an umber and some liquid, just so it's fast, it's there. And you'll probably not see that in the actual painting itself. I kind of don't do... Is it glazing? Where you build up the layers?
Yeah, glazing.
It's almost like a sketch to work over. So there's nothing like spending 2 or 3 days on a drawing and an underpainting and then paint over it.
Going back to, you said something interesting where you're talking about a story, finding a story for your work. It brought up a couple things to mind for me. How do you think of your work as more illustration or more fine art, or in some kind of nebulous zone?
Well, I don't define illustration. This is a good question because I don't know what's illustration.
I was hoping you would. I don't know how to define it. I mean, there's all these, everybody has their term, but I mean, an illustrator, I don't know, because I think because people would say illustrating something someone commissions you for, but that's not entirely true because there's tons of illustrators out there doing their own work. But because the second thing I was going to tie into is the idea of story, because for me, that kind of plays into illustration a bit more. How much story is there?
Yeah, but
how do you see it?
I don't think story is necessarily tied into illustration. I mean, I don't know what my work is. I would like to think it's more fine art. But obviously, not obviously, but I would say the drawing, the graphite, that's kind of feels to me very much more illustrative. But the painting is perhaps more fine art. Is that a valid way of looking at it? Feels to me more relevant.
Yeah, I don't think there's a wrong way to look at it. So, yeah.
I mean, story has always been part of fine art anyway, hasn't it? It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I think, but I wonder if I think so. And for the record, I consider yours more fine art, just so you know, on this side. Not that either's better than the other. Historically, yeah, definitely story's been a part of fine art. But then, once we get into abstract and then towards the 70s and the 80s, just looking within the history and the canon of art, that idea of story seems to drop and becomes about concept, which is loosely story, but I feel like we're back to story. I feel like story is an important thing.
Yeah, it is to me now. Really, this is where I feel like I should have been on some kind of art history degree or had some formal education, because it's not. I'm not talking with any kind of level of knowledge now. But yeah, I've never been big on concept and that kind of abstract art. No, I think that's perhaps not true. I think what I'm not big on is explaining art. Yeah. Does that? Yeah. I mean, a lot of conceptual art. I'm wrong here. I don't know, but it's my encounter with conceptual art. It always needs to be explained about the big idea, and it's like, well, if you're explaining it, then it's not connecting, is it? That's my view.
Right.
Could be wrong.
Yeah, where you need to read like a thesis paper before you experience the art.
Yeah, but then everyone has different approaches to art. I mean, so there's no right or wrong, is there?
No, that's the hard part in even discussing art, right? Because I used to think there was, naively, when I was in school, and now, of course, there's no right or wrong to art.
No. I think one thing, you can tell when art's been done with some honesty rather than being contrived. I think that's important. Mm-hmm. And I think you can tell that, even if it's stuff you don't like. I mean, I've seen some stuff, it's not my cup of tea at all, but you can tell that it's been done with some passion and some integrity and that, I think that's important.
Yeah. Honesty, authenticity.
But these are big issues to talk about.
Yeah. They are. I agree. And sometimes I wonder, especially now in the age when we have so much access to art, it's hard for me to tell if I'm seeing more things that I feel are not authentic, or was it always that way and we're just exposed to more art? You know what I mean? I think
we are exposed to more art, aren't we?
Right, yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, you're going to see a lot more of it.
Yeah, but does that make it easier to be inauthentic?
I don't know. Does what make it easier to be inauthentic? just that you can get it.
That access, because you can say one form of inauthenticity is, just biting off people's styles or something like that. It's much easier now to do that.
Yeah, it's easier and you see more of it. But I don't know whether that's because of, we're talking social media now, aren't we, really?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, something else just popped into my head because I was thinking too, like when I first saw your work, and even until now, and this is not intent. Well, it's a compliment, I guess. Is that I find like with a lot of work that I look at, or most people's experience, you can see somebody's influences. But with your work, I don't see your influences. I don't know what your influences are. And I think that's a good thing. I think it speaks to the authenticity of the work. But what were your inspirations? What artists inspired you?
Well, I've never really thought of it like this, but I mean, really, when I was going back to when I was a kid, I was into art. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed drawing. That was my big thing at school. And that was at the time then, so we're going back quite a long way. I was really into comics. There's artists like Bill, I might say his name wrong here, Sienkiewicz. Do you know him?
Mm-hmm. I don't think so.
No. And John Byrne, he was did a lot of work on X-Men comics. So I was really into them when I was younger because I read a lot of comics, but also Frank Frazetta, Boris Vallejo. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. Because I was into fantasy, the books, the Conan books. He painted a lot of cover of those. I've got loads of those, and I loved his work. So that used to really excite me as a kid. So that got me into art. And as a kid, I was always like drawing and copying from comic books. That's what I did. Got me into graphic design, and then really I didn't have any contact with the art world for probably, or any form of art other than design and that's I suppose as a designer and art director I should have done, but it was more from a commercial perspective through to when I actually picked up the paintbrush and started drawing again, sort of 12 or so years, 12, 13 years ago. So at that point, I've not really been that connected with any art for a very long time, other than, having a desire to create again. So I think at that point, it was pretty much a blank canvas. I'd got those reference points from my youth. But beyond that, it was just me putting down some marks that worked for me without much awareness of what was going on in an art world. I've never had that formal, like I said, about 10 times so far, I've not had a formal education, so I've not got, classical artists to draw on or any awareness, other than, you see things, don't you? But I had no knowledge of them.
Right.
I think I'd started, around about that time, I started seeing works, the ones of the internet, work by American, sort of inverted commas, I don't know what you call it, pop surreal, lowbrow artists like James Jean, people like that.
Okay.
Going back over 10 years ago. And that was inspiring at the time. I remember looking at a lot of his work. And bizarrely, at that point, I was hunting around on the internet and finding random artists. Randomly, Sam Flores is one of the first art books I bought around about that time.
Oh yeah, I know Sam's work.
Yeah, and they quite, it was kind of a style and vibe that I wasn't familiar with, and he does big hands, doesn't he? So maybe I just ripped him off.
Subconscious influence.
Yeah. So yeah. Oh God, damn it! Edit that out. So around about that time, yeah, I was just doing stuff. There's no plan. I wasn't that familiar with artists at the time. No, but since then, obviously, there's a whole raft of artists that you discover through Instagram, and museums.
It's something I was thinking about earlier when we were talking is, do you, maybe you have no opinion on this, but do you see, like with the art that you're seeing nowadays, any differences that you think can be contributed to seeing art in a museum versus just watching art online? Because I'm finding, I'm sure everybody does, because of the accessibility we have online, a lot less people go to museums. And I did too until I moved to Paris. And since they're so accessible, I go to museums all the time. And that made me see work differently again. And I feel like I view the work differently. Like you can tell, oh, these people are just looking at work online. And there's maybe because there's a flatness or maybe, I don't know, something to it. Do you think there's an effect because of that?
I think it's inevitable that people see more work online, obviously. What would they have been doing before? Would they have been painting?
Books.
Yeah. But would they... Are we talking about people... You see, this is what tripped me up before. Are we talking about people that are only creating art because they've seen things online, or are we talking about people that would be creating art anyway, but doing it in a certain way because they've seen things online?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't consider it like that. So I would say both. What do you think the differences are?
Well, I think if someone is inspired to create because they've seen something online, then brilliant. It's brilliant. If anyone feels, enabled to create anything, then that's awesome, no matter what they create. So that's good. That's the good side of social media. But I think if you are creating, you then have to take it further than just what you're seeing on social media. I think it has the danger of becoming lazy and one-dimensional. Now, I don't know whether people do that. I'm sure people do it. I don't know whether it's a problem. I think there's a certain style of art that I see a lot of that is what I would perhaps call an Instagram art. It's very kind of generic, but I don't know whether that would exist anyway, or if they weren't doing that, would they be doing any art at all? Do you know what I mean? I mean, anyone doing anything creative is brilliant, isn't it? You can't knock it, whether you like it or not. It's awesome. Whatever the motivations are, good luck to them, whether I like it or not. And I think that's amazing that people can do that.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm not so much voicing it in a way of like good, if it's good or not, or bad art. Like, for instance, an example for me is I remember, I think maybe also it's where I'm getting at is what it depends what you're trying to do. Like for me, as a painter who is into, like impasto paints and brush strokes, I remember the first time going to a museum to see that, specifically look at that, and it was eye-opening because I was like, oh man, you see it in a book, but you can't understand it. And that affected not only technique, but my experience of painting. I'm like, wow, now when I see a painting, I see the levels, I see the, little details, the layers of paint that don't transfer in a photograph.
Well, the absolute worst way you can experience art is on Instagram, isn't it? A little 2-inch square.
Yeah. Or any on the internet in general. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, Instagram specifically because it's so small, but then the internet in general is the second worst way. But then you're discovering stuff that you perhaps wouldn't have seen before. So as an intro, it's brilliant. But yeah, you just cannot compete with actually seeing the art. I mean, I find that with my own stuff as well. I mean, you post it. Well, I paint something, then you got to photograph it. And then you spend so long trying to get the photograph even close to what the painting is like. And then you put it online, and it looks completely different anyway, and it will look completely different on everyone's monitor. So, colours are completely different, textures completely different. You go and see a painting and get close to it. There's so many more levels that you can engage with. The texture, the colour will be completely different. The texture, the brush strokes, all of which build that, overall image. And you just don't see that unless you can, get close to it and actually see it in the flesh.
Right.
If you don't make that effort, then you're going to miss out, aren't you? I mean, yeah.
Yeah. And then eventually, in turn, it would have an effect on your work.
Yes. Yeah, inevitably. I think, it's much more inspiring to go and see art, real art in the flesh. I find so.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about, too, since I've been doing digital. And actually, it's funny because when... in the very beginning of this, when I was waiting for you to connect, not to turn this on me, but I got a notification that somebody commented on an image, and it was a digital image, and it was pretty much just like this negative comment of like, why do you try to replicate something that can be done by hand digitally, yada yada yada, and it really makes me think about that, like the differences of like, when art is the medium dictating how it should be viewed, right? Meaning, by a hand-painted thing, the only way you truly experience it is seeing it in person, right?
Was that a statement or a question?
So, no, it's a statement. Or you can disagree.
No, I agree. I think. I changed my mind.
Yeah, and so it just made me think about that comparison with digital. Like, what is is there validity to it?
Digital?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I don't... Yeah, it's just another medium. I mean, I was going to mention to you, actually, having seen the work that you've been doing, I think I was going to ask you, do you not miss the texture of painting? Because for me, as an artist creating, regardless of the whether digital is valid or not, I actually just like that feel of a piece of paper, of putting an ink mark on a piece of paper, a pencil mark on a piece of paper, putting some paint on a canvas, thick, thin. I like those. I like the texture and the hands-on feel of it. I wouldn't be able. Personally, I wouldn't be able to create art. I wouldn't enjoy creating art digitally. I like getting my hands dirty.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Definitely.
When I started, that's rewind back to what I was talking about, the digital work I used to do when I started off. One of the things I used to do then was I'd always scan in textures and overlay them, because to me the work felt too digital. So I'd scan in, wood, ink splashes, things I'd created, and use that in the composition just to try and bring some warmth through to it.
Yeah.
So I think even at that point, I felt digital. I mean, this is not reflecting badly on digital or a criticism, but for me personally, it lacked the warmth that I like. And I try to achieve it by doing that.
Yeah, that warmth you get with analog.
Yes, yeah. And then it was digital. I don't know. I mean, I think your question was, is it valid? And I'm sure it is. It's just not for me. I wouldn't enjoy working like that. Do you not miss that?
What's that?
Do you not miss the text, that analog feel when you're working digitally?
Well, I don't, because I still do it. I haven't transitioned. Like, I'm a digital artist now. I guess when I hear these comments more and more and I read these comments, I kind of wonder if I'm brain damaged in a sense, because I don't see it like that. I see it entirely as its own thing, and that fascinates me because it's risen to a level where it's a competent medium. I remember it just 5-6 years ago, latency issues, with now it's perfect. And so I don't know. I think when I realized, like, for me, that I'm more driven by process, that now I see this like, oh, okay, this is just another process. So I don't even see it as like negative comments I hear is, why try and simulate a texture when you can actually make a texture? And I don't see it like that. I'm like, because it's its own thing. It's to me like listening to a synthesizer. I'm not sitting there go like, why don't you just play a piano? Well, it's its own thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. Do it for, yeah.
But I don't know. What do I know?
No, well, there's nothing to know, is there? I mean, it's like, you're right. End of story. It's his own thing. So job done. And if that works for you, I mean, for me, it's just like, it's no different to, I don't like working with gouache either, because I just don't like the way the paint feels.
Oh, yeah.
And that's the way, gouache is, some people do incredible work with gouache. Some people do incredible digital work, but I just don't like working in digital, and I don't like working in gouache. So that's all it boils down to for me. And
tell me a bit about, I mean, I know you were mentioning earlier, it's kind of fun because you're like talking about having to talk about work, but I'm curious about the new work you're doing.
Oh, yeah.
And if you could speak to it a little bit. I mean, it's more like you were saying, it's, you've talked about some of the technical things. Like when I look at it, it seems more, man, I can't even put it's just good. It's just really good work. And what's driven you to the point that you're at now with this new work?
Going back to what I was saying with the illustrations, the pencil work that I did a couple of years ago, that kind of grew from a desire to want to expand upon some of the themes that I was already working with. It's something now that I'm more comfortable. I wanted, well, lots of answers here, and they've all kind of crashed into one sentence in my head. But the painting I'm working on now, I wanted to challenge myself. Yeah, I wanted to challenge myself to bring a level of detail that was in my illustrative pencil work through to the paintings, because I haven't done that. I've done one or two pieces where I started to do that, and I want to just kind of expand on that. I want to expand on the narratives, and I think I'm only now am I at a point where I feel that I will be able to achieve that through painting, through oil paints. So I'm kind of working on a couple of levels at the moment. I'm doing some small pieces that are more spontaneous and some bigger pieces that are more detailed. And I'm kind of flipping between the two to try and keep it fresh. And the bigger pieces I'm kind of approaching in a way that they're kind of ongoing projects. And I'm not going to sweat if they're not working. I'll just keep going at it until they do work. And part of that is I want to introduce a lot more reference points to the story. I just kind of want to expand. I want to create more involving worlds or involving stories, but not explicit stories. I think it's important to me because, again, I don't know what they are when I paint them. It's not like, I've got this story I want to get on a piece of paper. It's something that comes to life as I work on it. And I like when people are able to find those kind of, even if they're totally personal stories or to them within the work itself, or interpret it in a way that is unique to them. I love it when I get a message from someone about, I saw this and I loved it and it meant this to me and it meant that to me. I don't know whether it was what you meant when you did it. And it's like, well, if you got that out of it, I'm more than happy. That is brilliant. That is awesome that you've been able to connect in any way whatsoever. When I did it, it might have meant something to me. And often, you don't know what they mean until weeks, months further down the line, which makes it so hard to say what they're about because I don't know until further down the line. But yeah, I'm just at that point where I want to bring more involvement into my work, and I feel comfortable and I feel that I will be able to do that through painting, whereas before I might have defaulted to illustration. Again, I use illustration as a kind of draw to describe drawing, so maybe that's the difference in my head anyway. Whereas now I think, I want to paint it, but I want to paint those ideas. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that was really well put, man.
Thank you.
Right on. Thanks, Shaun.
All right. Thank you, John.
Lo-Fi Sight and Sound Podcast is a conversation of an American living in Paris, France, with contemporary European artists, filmmakers, and musicians. You can find us on all streaming platforms. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify, and spread the word. Thank you for listening.